Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright, and I'm here at Randolph-Macon College on May the 27th, 2009, with Professors Amy DeGraff and Robert Baerent. Robert, could you tell us how and when you first came to Randolph-Macon College?
Well, it was obviously September 1972. I had just been hired in December of 71 at the Chicago MLA conference by Bill Noe, who at that time was the chair of the German department.
Well, I was very fortunate. I had a colleague, actually we were graduate students at the University of Virginia, and she was already teaching here. And she said, we need somebody to teach adjunct. Could you come and do a couple of courses? So I did. And then the full-time position opened up. And so I competed for that. And I didn't go to MLA, but I was one of the candidates that was brought to campus. And I got the job. So were you recruited then, Robert?
Yes, I was recruited by Bill Noe, actually. Though you told me not to tell stories. But,
tell the story. I didn't tell you that. Tell the stories.
Yes,
they're good
did.
stories.
The hiring actually took place in a little wine restaurant in Cologne, Germany. Bill Noe took a class every January to Austria. And at that time, from 1969 until basically 1972, my wife Kathy and I, we lived in Germany, and I worked over there. We both worked over there. And we had just come to the MLA to look for a job, and then we went back to Germany because the job was waiting there. And Bill said, well, I'll see you in Cologne. And that's what happened. We sat there for about 2.5 hours, had a good number of glasses of wine, and got to know each other quite well. And he said, you're it. And that was all there really was to it back then. I do not know how many other candidates he saw in Chicago, but he said right then and there in January that I was the candidate of his choice.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yes.
That's great. And there's a question here about early role models and mentors. And I remember when I first came, my whole focus was the department and teaching and trying to do that well. And so I really didn't know anybody. But every morning I'd go to the Stagecoach restaurant, which is no longer there. There's a bank there, of course, now.
Right.
And I'd be preparing my classes, and Tom Porter and George Oliver and James Scanlon were there every morning having coffee in a different booth. And I'm working really hard, desperate to be really on top of everything, and they're just laughing and being, the way they were. So finally one morning they came over and they just said, just stop that, come over to our table. So that was great because I became friends with them, and they really took me under their wing. And, I felt it gave me that connection with the community. And Greg Doherty is the one, and in those days, Latin and Greek classics were in Haley with us. So, and Robert, actually, you were down the hall near the English department. But it was great because the languages were really all together in one place. And there was a lot of sharing that went on between the languages. Greg had this great idea to do a Saturday seminar for high school teachers. And they were doing that in classics. And then we picked that up and we did it with German. So, I think that was something we've lost because as we've grown and gotten bigger, as a department, there's just no room for anybody else on our side of the hall practically. Well, German is now with us. But Greg is the one who said, okay, now you got to get on a committee. I had no idea how to, what to do or that was an important thing to do. I was right out of graduate school. And so he really mentored me and said, let's think what committee, and we talked about it. We saw where there might be possibility for me to serve. So those were my role models. And I should add to that, there weren't any women. BJ, and actually she was also on our end of the hall. Religion was with us then, right?
Yeah.
And but she was older than I was, and we didn't really have very much contact. So my role models were men, as they say in French, forcément, necessarily. They had to be.
Well, I have to say, I did not have any role models or mentors here at the college. I came in 1972, and I don't know. Since I was so junior at that time, it almost felt like they were avoiding me. And well, I will tell you the story about Mr. Miller, who taught French at that time, and he was the only one who was friendly. He was an older gentleman. I would guess at that time he was well into his 50s, if not even early 60s. And so he asked me if I were a gardener, and I said, well, not really, but I like to garden a little bit, because I was afraid, offend anybody. So whatever they said, I agreed basically with him. And so he said, well, do you like tomatoes? And I said, oh, yes, we like tomatoes. And he says, well, do you grow any tomatoes? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, we are. And he said, well, what do you do? How do you fertilize them? And I said, well, I don't. And he said, well, you should. The very best thing is horse manure. And he said, if you want to, you bring a bucket and I can get you some horse manure. Well, I politely declined that one. But I said I would look into it, and then about 2 weeks later, he came very excitedly towards me and said, do you by any chance have a bucket? And I said, with you? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, otherwise, you and I could have gone downtown. I'm sorry. The circus is coming.
Oh, no, this is
and he said, even better than horse apple. It's elephant poop.
That's best. Oh, a tomato.
And that was my introduction, basically.
that was the only person who was speaking.
Mentor.
That was your mentor. Did you go with him?
No, because we didn't have any tomatoes. I just sort of agreed because he was the only person to talk to me outside the department, outside of Bill Noah. So he was, for that moment, my mentor. But like Amy, too, I mean, there were a couple of people that I thought, knew the ways around here. And Mr. Offenbacher, who was a math professor, he was sort of, in a way, he took me under his wings and said, well, you should do this and you should do that. And so we became good colleagues in that respect. We never friends. I mean, I never visited him, but he certainly helped me in many ways. So I revised what I said. I had no models or mentors. He did help. So what year did you come?
I came in my full-time, 1980.
Oh, 80.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I was No, that's wrong. 78, but I got hired full-time in 78? You're right. I lied.
A slight memory lapse.
No, it probably knocking off a few years here. That's what I'm doing. Yeah, I was. Oh, that's right. I was part-time. I had an adjunct in 77, and I got the full-time position in 78. That's right, because I got my PhD in 79.
So you basically taught in the same building that we did. I mean, really nothing has changed about Haley Hall.
Nothing has changed except air conditioning.
Yes. And who got that one? Greg
Doherty. Every faculty meeting,
Yes.
he would get up and say, this new business, old business, Haley Hall needs to be air conditioned. And the college didn't have money, or they weren't going to put it there. But we finally did get air conditioning.
Yes.
Thank God. It was
We
really
did,
horrible.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Horrible teaching when it was so hot.
It certainly was.
Well, and the other change also is the technology. I mean,
Yes.
our classrooms all now are tech classrooms. Well, with the exception of one or two.
And then what they did is there was the Fitzgerald room in Haley Hall, and they took that out. That was sort of a lecture hall that had 99 seats in it, and a projection booth upstairs. And so they showed movies there. And actually, it's very sad that we lost that kind of space, because there's nothing here on campus that could take its place. But what happened is that they put the new language lab in there, because the old language lab, which is now called room 111, and all the adjuncts are there in there, they were so outmoded that it just could not be refurbished. And I remember that the cassettes which they had there, they were about the size of a book. I mean, they were huge, and they kept the lab going, but they ran out of cassettes, and nobody made those things anymore. So there were fewer and fewer and fewer, and finally they just basically threw in the towel, and then we got a new lab.
We got a new beautiful lab. I mean, it really made a difference when you walked into Haley. It's true, we lost a really important kind of space, and it's something we need to find and establish someplace else. But it was really wonderful to have that lab. I mean, that made a huge difference for us. You have a question about the issues facing the faculty. So I think I'll start, and then,
Okay.
Robert, you can move backwards, because when I came, it was Luther White's last year. And I did not know what had been going on. And, of course, as I said, when I came, all I was looking at was my teaching in my department. I had no understanding of the issues. But he was very conservative, and there had been a huge amount of unrest and conflict between the faculty and White. And eventually he was forced out, actually. So when my first year, I guess that was the year, then the next year they hired Liddell, Payne, and Jerry. And it was a revolution. I mean, for us, it was that period of time of Liddell's administration. A sense of community was established. You didn't have all this stress between the faculty and the administration and all the issues. And, Liddell himself was an academic and a scholar in his own right. So I think, unlike Luther White, and he had quite a different personality, he was also very good at, how am I going to put it? He was not sardonic in a mean way, but there was a lot of nice sort of banter with him. And the faculty liked him, and because I became cabinet representative to the cabinet, I was able to see him also with the board, and he completely changed the board. The board had been very conservative, very regional. He put on there weren't any women on the board at that time, I don't think. He added women to the board. He added people from other parts of the country. Became a much more sophisticated board, and I'm sure a board that had, in terms of finances, was much better able to be a resource to the college. So that was kind of a major change that went on. And then the grounds themselves, when I came, and you must remember this too, Robert, the dining hall was so sad and disgusting. I'm sorry, that's not a good
disgusting.
word. And, the campus.
CX
Yeah.
is even more disgusting.
Yeah.
Snack bar.
Yeah. And it was just, the feeling of the campus was that it was just down at the heel. And
no
the first
flowers.
No
nothing.
flowers, nothing. It wasn't manicured. And that was one of the first things that he did. He changed the look of the campus. So it really looked like a place you wanted to be and a place that was moving forward. And I remember Dave Chellis, from the former chair of the department. We could talk about Dave sometime. But anyway, he was furious that the money was being spent on the aesthetics. And he never got the connection, and how important that was. And then, of course, we got the Rock Center, and we, it was wonderful. I mean, there was just such a sense that we were, things were happening, and the college was growing, and that we were, and we were. So, anyway.
Well, I came here in 1972, as I said before, and I can tell you what the first faculty meeting was that I attended. President White, who took, at least it looked that way, took note who came to the meeting, and that he would check off a list. And the meeting started, and as I say, it was my very first one, and President White was talking about that there were some financial problems that the college had to face, and all of a sudden, Jerry Bledsoe, who was a history, I think he was in history, and his wife taught actually Spanish,
Right.
got up and said, very close to this. The problem is not the economy. The problem with the college is not the economy. It's you, President Wright. And I thought, oh my God, what did I get into? You know. And from then on, the meeting just went downhill, and President Wright became very defensive, and Jerry just kept on going. He wouldn't quit. So I thought, that I had made a bad choice as far as employment opportunity were concerned. It festered all of the, for the next 4 years. And in 1976, the college had really reached rock bottom. They were almost ready to foreclose because the college could not pay off its debt. The only thing that, this is rumor, I don't know this firsthand, but it was said that the only reason why the banks didn't really call the loan in was because what were they supposed to do with this campus? There was not much that they could do. At that time, Washbank Hall was in horrible shape. Not the Mayor Branch, what's the other one? Thomas Branch, that's now new. I mean, it looked just awful. And so it was half of it was dilapidated, the old campus, as well as the building that houses now the arts department. All of those buildings just stood there, but you couldn't use them. And so what we're going to do, so the college sold all the assets that it had, all the houses that they have behind the tennis courts, and that's one of the reasons why Bill Hesse, who was then in the physics department, bought a house there, and his wife still lives there. And the college, in the meantime, has bought all the houses back again. And we got a pay raise of $100, and a lot of people were so angry about that they returned the $100 because they thought that was an insult. And so what to do? And President Wright, again, I don't know that firsthand, that was the rumor, was just simply too proud as a Southern gentleman and a lawyer to go begging, as he put it, for money. And the board was made up primarily of ministers and who themselves didn't have any money, so to speak. So they said the only way that this whole thing can be resolved is if we unionize. And that's the big trauma of the college. And the Board of Trustees was just outraged that the faculty would even contemplate anything like that. And so somebody came from Washington, D.C., and the whole thing was set up, and the vote did take place. And I think it was something like 29 to 32, something like that.
Which one? For?
Against.
Against.
It might be a little bit one off, because it was said that if one person would have gone the other way, it would have been unionized. It was that close. Well, then the Board of Trustees said, well, President Wright, I mean, there must have been great dissatisfaction if they want to unionize. And so basically they said, you got to go. And then just like what Amy said, Payne came, put term limits on the board, got basically rid of,
Deadwood.
Of those who could not produce.
Right.
And did things in a big way.
With a lot of style.
With a lot of style, exactly. I can remember my wife was, in a way, shocked that she got a call one day from Patricia White, and Patricia said, the board is coming. And Kathy didn't know what she was talking about. And so Patricia said, well, we always have done that the faculty wives would bake cookies for the board. And so she said, well, I certainly can count on you for 24 cookies. And so, I was a brand new kid here, and Kathy didn't know. So she made 24 cookies, and that was what the board had, and what we called Methodist punch, sort of
Methodist punch.
Something that looked like pink lemonade, but only remotely tasted like lemonade. I mean, it was watered down stuff. So, and Patricia, for instance, would plant the flowers around the president's house all by herself. There was no help or anything like that. I mean, they really did everything on a shoestring. And I think, though, that the whole college felt poor.
Right, exactly.
And don't ask, don't do anything. And to a certain extent, it was poor. I mean, I can vouch for that. Amy was faculty representative. I was faculty representative. And I remember that this was already under President Payne, though, but the early years, that he was aghast because the night before he had gotten a call from one of our recruiters, a young lady, whose car, which was a college car, near Boston, had just blown up, basically, on the freeway, and she was stuck there some like 9 o'clock at night, and she didn't know what to do, so she had the car towed in, and they basically said there's no reason to fix it. But we didn't have the money to get a new car, and so the president said, we need 2 more students. I mean, that's how close it was. We need 2 more students to come in the fall in order to be able to not buy, but lease a car from Luck Motors. So, I mean, everybody knew how tight the budget was, but as Amy said, too, President Payne gave you hope.
Right.
And it was just totally different, and he had a wonderful way. Sometimes it got in the way of certain things because he was, just like Amy said, a jokester. And his first...
he was flip.
Yeah, the
Very
development
flip
officer
Yeah.
was actually a good friend of his from California. And when they had these meetings early in the morning, when
The cabinet meetings?
those two would banter back and forth, and some of the other people sort of said, gee, couldn't they quit it? Because most of us weren't quite that quick, to come up with an answer.
Right.
But it was really a wonderful experience to have him there.
Add something to that, because this whole thing about style, and it's not style without substance. I mean, it really was not. But as Robert was saying, there was the Methodist punch because there was no alcohol. And the faculty were completely infantilized at these, parties because there was no alcohol. We were treated like the students, like we weren't old enough to drink and do drink appropriately. But the first thing Liddell did that everybody noticed, the party for the faculty at the beginning of the year, he served wine. Do you remember that?
Yes.
We were so stunned. That small gesture was so huge. And not only that, but Jean had just an incredible sense of how to do things well with taste. And so we weren't just served wine out of the box, It was good wine. It was wine that I wanted to find out what that label was. And I'm going to tell a story now. This is a little bit tales out of school, but when Rusty came, we had that old mentality back, And I remember Rusty, he didn't want to spend money. He was going to go to Paris, and he didn't even want to take a taxi in from the airport. And this was after he had had his cancer. And I said, Rusty, take a taxi. I take a taxi. You're a college president. Take a taxi. But he was, what was his religious background? Was Calvinist in some way. But anyway, Quaker. Well, close. But anyway, yeah. So he decided they were going to have these little get-togethers with the faculty. And so with wine, and to start with, there was sherry. Okay. So anyway, we sat down to dinner, and dinner was very nice. The wine, I couldn't drink it. It was so bad. I mean, really, really bad. So there are 2 parts of this story. The next day, I went to Lois in the dining hall, who was at that time in charge of all this, and she said, I'm really sorry. She said, we tried to tell her, we tried to tell them. They insisted on buying the wine themselves. They got Franzian in a box and put it in bottles to save money. And isn't that hysterical? And she said, about herself and the wine and just the way things were done, she said, Mrs. Payne really trained us well. She trained that whole staff over there, and what was good wine, what went with what. Of course, that was also important for the board. I mean, you needed to entertain the board with a certain style and savoir-faire, and she did that. But that boxed wine was just awful. And the last part of this story was that So Rusty also wasn't, what's the word I want to use? He wasn't that social and not that comfortable, I think. So the dinner's over, and it's only, I don't know, 8:30 or 8:45, and Rusty's standing on the stairs, and he says,
It's in his house.
in his house. And here we are. And he says to the faculty, were you there that night? Or you heard the story?
No, I was.
You were
It
there.
happened to me too. I don't know if it was the same night. It was the same thing at least three times.
Yeah, he stood at the stairs and he said, well, I'm going to bed now. And you all stay and have some more sherry. Well, first of all, there was no more sherry. Absolutely nothing on the bar. And he disappeared.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you know, we were sort of back to where we had been. But those years that Liddell was here, for so many reasons. And by the way, the other thing I wanted to mention is that the first thing Liddell did was the dining hall. And, you know, I hadn't quite put it all together why that was so important. And, of course, people in languages, because food is so, the whole gastronomy thing of, you know, the food and the culture. But food is incredibly important and entertaining in a certain way and at a certain level. So the environment, not just for the students downstairs, but that whole upstairs, and where you could entertain, and we had that lovely, beautiful little room, the Hughes room, is it called? Yeah. I mean, it's gorgeous with the oriental rug and everything. All of that was Liddell. And I, you know, when I was cabinet rep, the last thing I'll say, and then we move on, but his ability to connect with the board and their appreciation of him, which I saw because there was a dinner for him in which they thanked him by handing him a check so he and Jean could go on some really nice vacation. And the absolute appreciation, and I would say love, of Liddell was so clear. I mean, it was just palpable.
Yeah. That's even true. I mean, he came back a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And it was sort of like the Pete Piper of Hamelin. Everybody came running towards him, wanted to shake his hands, and I think he was visibly pleased. He was taken aback and pleased. Naturally, it would have been the older faculty members because the new ones don't remember him. They remember the rusty years, if they want to remember them at all. And the involvement. And so I asked him, why are you here? You know, not a very nice question, but basically what he said that in order to get $1 million gift, it takes about 7 to 8 years, you know, to get the person to
cultivate it.
That's the word. And he said, well, it's one of the gifts in which I was involved. So even though he was he had retired, I think at least 3 years, I think it was. He came back for that to make sure that the money would get here. The other thing which I would like to say is that the back to school dinners, he outdid himself every year. Couple of years, people started grumbling, but I mean they were nice grumbles because Liddell Payne was a great fan of Gilbert and Sullivan. And so the Barksdale Theater put on 2 or 3 years in a row or something like that, Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. And so we went there, we listened to it, and then we had the dinner, or we had the dinner first, and then we listened to the operetta. But we went also down to the airplane museum.
Browns Island? No, it was near down there.
Yeah, the ironworks.
Yes,
it's no long Tredegar Ironworks.
It was beautiful.
It was beautiful. They had the what is that French? Lumiere.
The Son et Lumiere.
Sound and light show there on the building. You know, they showed that for us, and the dinner was terrific. We went out to the aviation museum and had it there. And the other thing which he did is he invited also the staff. And so it was really a much more a group of people rather than us against them. And I think Rusty sort of fudged that a little bit. I mean, I think it was just more faculty than staff. Okay, fine, the staff has its own meetings and all of that. But I think Liddell sort of somehow was able to combine the two, so you really thought it was a family. And I remember that we sat quite a number of years with staff or from the physical plant, sprinkled in. The, yeah, and we still, Kathy and I, we still talk about
Right.
that.
Well, he made you feel feted. I mean,
Yeah.
he made you you felt appreciated by
Yeah.
all of these gestures, which under White the faculty certainly didn't feel.
Yeah.
Do you want us to talk about
Go
the
on.
major changes in the curriculum?
Yeah, but the department and things like that.
Well, probably the two biggest ones for me are study abroad and technology. When I came, that was maybe a few years after I came, we proposed the first study abroad program for French in Paris. And now we have, of course, study abroad is, it's a major part of the education here. And I think that's incredibly important. And I see the change in the students in terms of their awareness that American culture isn't just monolithic, and everybody doesn't think the way they do. And then, creating in them the desire to know more, to go beyond. So study abroad was for us, and also for French, for languages. Aside from just the importance of what you get from the contact with another culture, our students came back so much better at their ability to communicate. So we added not just the Jan term, but, full semester study abroad. And now there are just really wonderful things, too, in Africa, and all sorts of just the kind of variety of experiences that are, have been created abroad. And the technology for us in languages has been a godsend. Absolutely a godsend. And we can access, real French speaking. We get the news, televised news. We were able to record that. We can use it in our classrooms. When in teaching civilization, I used to have to lug, 10 books into class and hold them up and show the Renoir picture, And now I can put these magnificent paintings on a PowerPoint. I found a PowerPoint of Notre Dame, or anyway, it's a Gothic arch, and actually the pictures move under the arch, so you feel like you're actually there. It's a virtual reality. You are just, it's just amazing. So, and then lots of different kinds of exercises that you can use PowerPoint pictures for. So the whole visual part has just been really wonderful, visual and oral. I don't know, Robert, for you too, right?
Absolutely. There's really not much I can add except another thing in the curriculum that has changed would be that under Payne, a reduction in the teaching load.
Oh, yeah.
From 8 to 7.
Jerry Garris is the one, though.
Yeah, which made a huge difference.
Huge difference.
In what we do and how we also approach our classes.
Mm-hmm.
There was one other thing now that I thought was important, but now I forgot. It's a sign of old age. That
No.
You don't write it down. Oh, yes, I do. And that's the computer. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember that if I wanted to duplicate something, I had to use a Spirit Master, which, when I say that to anybody nowadays, they look at me and say, what the heck is that? And I remember that in the Copley Science Center, which back then was only called the Copley Center, the Science Center. Yes, exactly. You could make about 20 copies, and then that was about the end of it. And back then, when I started Randolph Macon, the German classes, I think they were the largest classes because we taught multiple tracks for beginning German, and so I was the designatee to teach those, and we had more than 20 students in each class. So I used to make 2 of them because after 20, you couldn't read them anymore. And then they had the other one with the rubber backing where you could make 50 of them. But woe unto thee if you made a mistake, you couldn't correct it. So you just simply had to
Scratch
X
it
out or scratch out the word, X it out, and write the word. So it was very, very messy, and I still have some of them. And over the years, the whatever the liquid was that they used there has sort of eaten the whole thing
away.
Well, not away, but it was blue ink, which so purpley ink, and it had, if it's the letter N, you just see a blob now. You do not know what the letter is. It's just sort of, so you can't even use it anymore. You can't even Xerox it. And now we have Xerox machines, and, gosh, we got a Xerox machine there that makes, I don't know, 70 copies a minute, so something like that. I mean, it's just amazing.
But also, the downside of it is that everything is moving so fast.
Yes.
I mean, and I think that's something that's really changed. I mean, there has been such an emphasis, I think, on professional development and faculty producing and writing. And we used to hang out. Now, part of this might be age, but when I came, the faculty hung out together, and the students hung out with the faculty. James Scanlon always talks about his students were there on a Friday afternoon,
Yep,
sitting, chatting with him, and gaining, wisdom and whatever at the same time. This just does not happen anymore. Everybody is so busy, and so I think that is kind of. On the other hand, there are so many wonderful changes that if I had to make the trade-off, I would do it again. But we have lost something, I think. I was going to say also, I think that I don't know, Robert, you may disagree with me, but I think that there's a greater connection now between what goes on in the classroom and just the intellectual life of the campus. And I think that comes through the fact that we have SURF and the capstones and Research Day. And I think those things have really added something very important, to what we do and to the sense of, and to the student's sense of being intellectually involved, and that it's something important and a pride in their work. And I don't know, do you think that's not so?
I agree. But I want to add something to what you said before, why there was more time. I mean, first of all, the students didn't have movies, iPods and all that other stuff.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
So, well, what do you do? So you intramural sports or nothing, basically. The other thing also is that I think over the years, the students certainly have changed. I remember coming to Randolph Macon, and you simply say, in your book, page 17, learn the vocabulary. Nowadays, they want that on a special piece of paper, or in other words, what I'm getting at is that the faculty member does much, much more to facilitate the learning of the student. Back then, we thought the students behaved as somewhat more mature, or at least since they didn't have all of this technology, you simply depended more on the students that they would do the work on their own, rather than that you help with so many things. So it has, in a way, added to the teaching load, because you do much, much more. As Amy said, you brought in a book and you showed, hey, look at that. This is the Mona Lisa, and everybody dutifully looked at it. Nowadays you do a PowerPoint, and I got quite a number of PowerPoints, but it takes days to do a good PowerPoint, and you got to change it because you find out the picture of Mona Lisa does not really go over too well, so you do something.
Well, you're constantly revising it.
Yeah.
I mean, and adding and making it better, and
exactly. And so I didn't do that. I didn't do that because there was only the Mona Lisa. That's all I had.
Yeah.
That was the book.
Right.
And I remember that faculty members, had lecture notes where when they turned the page, the corners would fall off because they were so old. Because things just didn't change that much, so there's a trade-off, and the trade-off in a way is that we are much more involved in the articulation of the studies that our students are supposed to undertake, even SURF. I mean, back then, summer came, I went home. That's it. Now we got SURF, So there are some changes, and I agree. We are much more connected to the learning of the student. On the other hand, I remember when I came to Randolph Macon that under Payne, for instance, they said, here's some money, bring the students to your house. Yeah. So that the students see how you live. There's a closer connection between you, the professor, and you, the human being. Well, I don't do that anymore. And last time I invited somebody to go to a restaurant, there were 12 people who said they're going to go, and when I showed up, there were 4. And the rest of them all said, well, I had something else to do, or, this or that. So back then, if 12 said, we'll come, 12 would have shown up. So it's different, and we have to go with the times. And so back then, I taught a lot of literature. Now we teach much more language acquisition. So something has also changed what we teach, how we teach. Students don't like to read anymore. When I came to Randolph-Macon, people did like to read. So.
Yeah. I don't know. I still find them interested in literature, but it is one of the ways our curriculum has changed. We're adding now a track in culture, which will not have any literature in it. And that will be a minor track, but I can imagine it will only be a few years before that becomes a major track. So whereas traditionally our major has been there's civilization, language, but quite a number of literature courses. And so there's that change. You also wanted us to address the change as far as which languages, the kind of rise and fall of different languages. And Robert, before I came, German was the language, right? French, not so, and Spanish, not at all important. And then German dropped considerably in importance. French, for the middle years, a lot of students were taking French. We had quite a few sections. And Robert said to me, just you wait. And he was right, because now Spanish, as you know, has just mushroomed. And unfortunately, high schools are dropping their other language programs so that they can pay for the faculty in Spanish. And so it's really a budget issue for the most part, although I guess it's a commitment to, the fact that America has more Hispanic people. But in any case, Spanish has doubled, French has dropped, and German is about where you were when I came. So, that's kind of the way things have been going. And I don't know about the future. My view of the future is that Spanish, like English, both will be national languages, and then everybody will study a second language.
Right. Which will be Chinese and Japanese, those and Arabic, those.
Yeah.
Did you want to?
I have more to say if you want us to keep going, but if you don't, there's something I was thinking about.
I'm good.
It's okay to.
Okay.
I'm going to say at the very end a couple of things about Flavia Owen.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
But the problem is that I was about to say something and I've lost it. Well, you had a question about most satisfying experiences. Yeah, I guess personally, on a personal level, obviously, I think probably for all of us, teaching is the thing that we love most, and it's the most satisfying. And I was going to tell a teaching story in a second. But coming to a small school turned out to be so wonderful for me. We're all trained at big universities. That's where we think we're going to end up. But in a small college, you can teach outside your specialty area, which you can't very easily in a large institution. So I taught not only my specialty in 17th century literature, but I was teaching civilization courses, and I was teaching 20th century literature and, other things. Anything I really wanted to teach, I could teach. So I was constantly growing, and that was wonderful. But the other thing for me was being able to participate in the committee life, of the governance of the college. And I think I was the first woman chair of a college committee, which was Resources and Plans. And I'm pretty sure I was the first woman faculty representative to the cabinet. Yeah. And so I had opportunities which I would not have had in a large school. And it gave me such a broader sense, of the school. It was so much better to have the sense of the needs of the entire institution instead of just my department. And I think that those are just incredible advantages to being at a place like Randolph-Macon. and Randolph-Macon itself, not just like Randolph-Macon. But then I wanted to tell a teaching story, okay? So, and do you have one, Robert, or you want to talk about Flavia?
No, I'm going to say that I second and third what you have said, that this college indeed has given me opportunities which I would not have had anywhere else. It has been a broadening, satisfying experience.
Yeah, and I think most of us feel this way. I mean, I am so grateful that I absolutely love my job. You know, I love teaching, I love participating, love the research, all of it. And I just feel very grateful that that's been my life. But anyway, in the days when we used to get some money from the administration, I was teaching, and I still am teaching this conversation course, but I'm doing it quite differently. And we had a textbook where we studied a small fictitious village in France, rural. And it was like many rural villages at that time. And there were all the characters in the village. There were, of course, the farmers. Then there was the mayor. Then there was the veterinarian. Then there was the priest. And and there was the marquis, because the village had begun in the Middle Ages with his chateau and the surrounding outbuildings and whatnot. So, and there are interviews with all of these people, and they discuss the problems because the town is dying, because the big farming things are coming in. And so I used to have my students, I used to do a dinner at my house. In those days, the drinking age was 18. And so we had wine, we made fondue, we made beef fondue, we all made the sauces together, huge salad, chocolate fondue for dessert. But they had to come in their role. They had to come, the priest came dressed as the priest. The mayor, he wore a top hat and tails. I came as the Marquis's mother, the Marquise, and I wore my wedding dress, which I still fit in those days. So everybody was all dressed up in odd, this association was so bizarre. And we'd have the conversation. Everything was in French. And then we had to talk about how to solve the problems of this community. So it was absolutely just a great experience, and the kids loved it. It was called the Montpré Dinner, and the students from those years, they still talk about it. But one very funny thing happened, which is that we had to go to 7-Eleven to get some Coke, and we all piled into cars. I'm in my wedding dress. I can hardly fit. The mayor's top hat didn't fit so well either. And we get to 7-Eleven. Now, mind you, there are people dressed up like farmers. There's me in my wedding dress, the mayor, the priest. And we were wandering down the aisles, and I said, now you all have to talk French, all the time, which they did. So then I said, we got up to the cash register, and there was a young man there, and no one really could figure out what we were doing there, because it was like a circus, nothing fit. Even the costumes that we were wearing didn't go together, So we just acted like foreigners. We held the money out to him. We said, you take. So as we were leaving, this guy, it was so sweet. It was such a confirmation that we played our roles well. He starts waving to us, au revoir, au revoir. He had learned one word in French, au revoir. And everybody in the store stopped, and they're all going, au revoir. So that was just wonderful. Robert saying, having the students over, we did that on a regular. I did that every year, and actually had all of my classes over, for something. So, but I don't do it anymore.
No, same here. One gets older,
Well,
and the
that's part of
students,
it.
to a certain extent, believe that they're too sophisticated for that type of thing. I think back then students were much more inclined to go along, and if you had hot dogs and things like that, that was perfectly fine. We had some problems also by serving some German dishes, and students saying, "What's that?" And but you take that in stride. The first time you might be taken aback. The second, the third time, you say, "Well, that's how it goes."
I'm sorry, but Margaret Crossan, she was McGrath. Her stories and her husband's stories about Randolph-Macon, they all have to do with faculty, like Bill Gray, who used to talk about Faulkner and Richie Watson, and going to their houses, and the interaction and the stories, and that was such an important part to her, of her education. But you don't hear that kind of thing much anymore.
No.
By the way, P.S. Sue Draney Schick played the priest one year. Do you know who she is? Oh, she was head of the board. Not the board. It was the Academic Affairs Committee, I think, on the board. She's very involved in the college. Just in case anybody knows who she is. She was the priest 1 year. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I also think very fondly of those times when they came over and Kathy cooked, and actually we had a wonderful time, and I will also say that more students from that era still write than students from the last 7 or 8 years. Yeah, I can tell you exactly 2 students who were German majors from the last 8 years that still write, and say hello, how are you, and that kind of thing. All the others are from the earlier years. Well, okay, admittedly, I was also a lot younger, but they were different times. Well, it says here, we're interested in memories of Flavie Owen, and the one that I remember, the first time I got elected to the board and to the committee on the faculty, it was under Elton. What was it? Elton
Hendricks.
And Elton would do the following thing. He would come in and say, well, today we have, John and Mary and Raoul, and I have to tell you, I cannot support Raoul and Mary. And
wow.
And so that was basically the end of the discussion, because, I mean, he's above us, and the only one who would stand up to him, and everybody else would say, okay, was actually Flavia.
Really?
And she would say, no, I want to discuss these people. I want to see, what cons and pros of this candidate. And we were sort of amazed that she got away with it. I don't know what her standing was very, very high in the community. And so I guess nobody dared, not even the dean, to say, quiet. And so that's one thing. The other thing, which I do find a little bit funnier, I was asked through Bill Noah what kind of magazine I would like to have here in the library. We were all allowed, every foreign language department was allowed to have one foreign magazine. And so
just one?
Yes, just one. And so I thought of a German magazine by the name of Stern, S-T-E-R-N, which means star. And so we subscribed to that. And one day, there was a telephone call, and Flavia said, Robert, I want to see you right away. And I thought, good God, what's the matter? And I came over here, and she said, as soon as the what's the word here? Not prescription. The subscription to Stan runs out. No more.
Huh.
And she said, "This is a paper. This is a magazine we just cannot tolerate in our library." And the reason was that, as Amy knows, Europeans are much more tolerant, and there were people, females, on the cover who were, let's say, lightly dressed. And she had found on her rounds one of these magazines with a lightly dressed front cover in the men's bathroom. And she never said what she thought, but we all knew what she thought had happened in the bathroom with that picture. And so what happened from then on, when the Stan magazine came, she would rip off the front page. And
that's very old school.
Yes, it was. But, we did not have any magazines that had anything that in any way would offend anybody. And so, I remember, too, when Reeschild, in his collection.
The Don Juan collection.
Yeah, and the
Casanova, right?
The barbed wire up there that they had.
I didn't
I'm
know.
not making this up. They had barbed wire around the top because one student managed one time to slip over the top into it and take a look at the collection there.
Wow.
And so, that was
So
an
things have
absolute
really
no-
changed.
an
Oh,
absolute
Lord.
no-no.
Oh, my.
So those things I do remember about her. So, yeah.
Well, I didn't know Flavia very well, so I can't. But Richie Watson can tell stories. Ginger wanted to know some of the things that our students are doing with language, whether they're minoring, majoring, and so I just have a little list of some of our majors are doing now. One is working actually for the Monaco tourist office, and so she has met the royals and she travels, and which I think is fantastic, and it's all obviously because of the French, and she's good. Another one is in New York. She's now in charge at Bergdorf Goodman of the Valentino line, and so she goes to the fashion shows in Paris and Italy, and she's learning Italian now. She loves language. That's how this all started. And so she's just a great spokesman. I'm going to have her back to talk with our students. There's another one who is going to be working in a museum, international education. Of course, we have students who are teachers, and there are several who are have their doctorates and are at universities. And there's one last thing. Oh, did I mention internet? Oh, I did want to mention that we've had a number of students go do the Peace Corps. And I've been really, really pleased about that. That's something I would like to work on promoting more. So, yeah.
Well, we are not quite that illustrious. We have people who have become teachers. And the other thing which is sort of, interesting, let's put it this way, is that at least 5 people that I can think of have gone into the world of computers and have done something with that, but have not really used their German. But maybe there's something about learning the rules and all of that. Bill New and I, we always thought that math majors were particularly good at German, with all the rules and regulations and all of that. So that's about what has happened. A bunch of them just simply disappeared. Well, we have 2 people who became professional translators.
Well, there you go.
From German into English, not the other way around. And some of them have worked here in town, well, at least one of them.
Yeah.
And she has her own translating office now. Yeah, that's about all I can think of.
Tracy Sutphin, what is she doing? And then there are others that have just disappeared because they've gone and lived in Germany and stayed.
In France, yeah.
Or France.
Tracy Sutphin, the last time I heard from her was 3 years ago, and she was teaching English and French in a German school.
Right.
Private school. So, but she was also a barmaid for a short time, and she said the toughest thing was, to get the beer just right.
Oh, well, for German palate, I can
So
imagine.
it has to, there has to be foam, the right amount of foam.
Oh, how
And
interesting. What a skill.
And then, golly, Varley, that's her last name. I forgot
I don't think I knew
his
her.
name.
Oh, him.
She is now in the Peace Corps also. She's in Africa. She just wrote me a long letter, said this is what I'm doing. So, and then we have another one who is in China teaching English.
You see, the world just
So,
opens up to you.
yeah.
It almost doesn't matter which language, but, in different ways. We actually have somebody, and I've forgotten whether it was an NGO that she started with, but she opened her own branch in Paris, and she is there living and working, which I found amazing. But so, the students, there are things that they can do with language besides teaching. There was always the view that all you could do, was teach, and it's not true. But it's like all liberal arts. It's like English. I mean, you're training, way of thinking. The literature you're learning about, how people think. I mean, it's just, It's a good little liberal arts degree.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, that's
We've kept you a
almost-
long time.
Final thoughts? Anything else you want to
Well,
say?
there was one here. How would you sum up your years at Randolph-Macon? One word: happy. I have no regrets.
Oh, that's great.
Sometimes I regretted not being closer to the campus so I could go to some of the things at night. But when I get home at 5, at least at my age now, when you get at 5, it's hard to crank yourself up again to come out for a 7 o'clock something, but other than that, I really, I've done what I wanted to do. I've been on every major committee. Well, not quite every, but most. I've been on SPA, SPC.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say that my happiest years here were actually the ones with Liddell Payne, and I worked
Jerry.
very yes.
Jerry Garris.
Jerry
He
Garris.
also, we haven't given him enough credit.
He really knew how to do it. This is not to brag, but what happened is that I had been on the committee on the faculty, as I just said, Flavio and all of that. And then I wasn't reelected. And so there was a gap of about 5 years. And then I got reelected. And then they said to me, would you like to be chair of the committee on the faculty? And that was the same year that Garris came. And so I said to him, if we can come to an agreement that the committee on the faculty is totally independent, and you're not going to tell us at the beginning what you think of a candidate, but that you let us deliberate, and you should be there, and if we need some, guidance or some information, that we would love to have that from you, but you would not interfere. And he agreed with that. And so it was a very, very cooperative thing. He would listen to us, and then at the end he would say, well, I agree with you. I have these reservations about the candidate. And then he would lay out what he thought. And as a chair, I worked very, very close with him, and I would never say that if he disagreed with my take on something, he would do it in such a way that it was in no way hurtful. He did have that ability to listen to you
was
and
extraordinary.
make you think that you're the only person on God's earth right now, and that he has no other problems, there are no other things but your whatever it is that's bothering you. And he would make decisions very, very fast. I thought they were all well thought out, but he would make them very fast. And I was just in awe of him to a certain extent, as you might hear from the way I talk, because when you're chair of a committee, you're also part of the executive committee. And so sometimes the committee on the faculty would end and the executive committee would meet, and I would go into the executive committee and say, what the heck are we doing today? And there he was. And he,
Totally on top of it.
Totally on top. Never missed a beat, and he knew exactly what was going on. And I thought that was just absolutely tremendous. And I thought he, unlike some other deans and provosts, and he would discuss with the chair, what do you think the future will hold? And one of the things that was discussed was, for instance, we knew that, according to all the research, that in the next 7 to 8 years there would be a dearth of faculty in certain areas. And so he said, well, we got to look forward to, be ahead. Let's hire young faculty. And the only thing that we have, we can't compete in salary with some institution, but we compete because we are one of the last institutions that still have tenure. And that was in the 80s, in the early 90s. And he said, that's our hook. And so if we get them here and they have tenure, they probably will stay, even though somewhere else they could get more salary. And I thought, that was quite good. We worked towards that goal. And during his tenure here, there were a lot of new faculty members.
Well, it's true. Very few people leave, just
Yeah.
leave.
Yeah.
And
even the selection, and I always thought, too, that when I listened to my colleagues in other institutions who were fighting and they didn't, all that kind of stuff, I never had that. Never had that.
And we're talking really about the Liddell Payne Garris years.
And even with my colleagues within the departments, that it was the same thing. We used to, maybe I shouldn't say that, but we used to have with
TGI.
Greg.
Right, with Greg.
Thank God it's Friday, and we used to have. That's when drinking was still allowed with 18. We didn't have any students, but we would on Friday afternoon in Greg's office. We would sit there and we would have a little snack, but primarily a little drinky poo, and
we laughed a lot.
We laughed.
And
we would share even our problems. And there was nothing there where somebody said, you know what Robert just said? He had trouble in his 211 class. Blah 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 blah. That kind of thing. You felt, well, you could share it with with them. What did you do in 211 when you had this problem? And somebody would say, well, I did this. But nobody said, well, I'm the greatest teacher here, and you ought to listen to me. Or when I was back at UVA or whatever it is, and this is the way. It was really very, very collegial. I have to say, unfortunately, things have changed in that respect in the last 5 to 6 years. So that's one thing I'm missing very much, that great collegiality that you would also... Well, I'll give you one more example. I was teaching a course, medieval literature, had about 4 or 5 people in it. I was teaching it in German. It was a flat course. And I was lamenting it one afternoon on a Friday with Greg Doherty. And Greg said, God, Robert, you got to do something about it. You got to jazz it up. And he says, why did you call it Of Kings and Queens? And I thought, And so I called it Of Kings and Queens. And I'm not making this up. I tripled the enrollment. There were 20 kids who read medieval literature. I could hardly believe it. And, that's the kind of thing that went on. And Dan and Greg singing all the Tom Lehrer songs. Oh, my God, they went on for hours. They knew every verse.
That was so funny.
Yes, and even Scanlon came over. And
right.
We all had a great time. That's, I think, what Amy was also remarking about. We also had the time. And nowadays, I see it. Well, let me also, it's different. Okay. Also, we never called ourselves professionals because we knew we were professionals. So we didn't have to tell everybody that we are professionals. And so when 3 o'clock came, we got together. Nowadays, 3 o'clock comes and everybody is off. And I don't know how many courses Amy taught. I know how many courses I taught that we were never compensated for because we thought it was important for the department to survive. Nowadays, if you teach half an hour more, I'm not going to do it because I'm a professional. B, I want to get paid for it. So these are some of the things that have sort of sneaked in the meantime. But I can live with that too. I'm saddened, but that's my last word. Zip.
Robert said happy, and I would say that, and the experience has been wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I've loved my life here. So.
Thank you very much for sharing your memories and your experiences here with us today at Making Memories. Thank you.
You're welcome.